Okay, so hey everyone, welcome to the very first episode of our deep dive podcast series at Altius, where we go beyond the code and actually meet the minds behind the tech at Altius Labs. So I'm your host, Ivan, and today I'm sitting down with someone who's been building distributed systems longer than most of us have even known what that means. And by saying that, I mean most of us have ever worked in Web3. So he's the CTO and co-founder of Altius Labs, Anit. Hi, Anit. How are you doing today?
Hey, Ivan, thanks for the intro and hello to everyone out there.
Hey. So before that, just so you know, Anit spent over 2 decades as a developer, including at Oracle and HRT, and built infrastructure for some of the fastest trading systems in the world. That's why we thought that it might be cool to speak out a little bit and get questions towards from your side so that we can respond on them. In this series, we will cover everything from Web to Web3 infrastructure to the evolution of the software architecture since the early 20s to what comes after the EVM as well, given that, as you remember, Altus is VM agnostic. We'll also get a rare peek into the life and mind of founders who's not just building another blockchain, but rethinking how the execution should work. And so stay tuned with us. Each week, we'll drop a new episode, short, sharp, 10 minutes each, breaking down the topics at a time. So whatever you are, developer, founder, or just a curious Web3 enthusiast and interested in how the real builders think, please subscribe, follow Altius Labs on Twitter along, and let's get into. Hello, everyone. So we are kicking off with our first series episode where we speak today about what it's been building 20 plus years ago and how software architecture has evolved. I have Anit here today to walk us through this journey and kind of try and remember, Anit, what it was, how it looked, the industry 20 years ago. I can assume that what was it like writing code in early 20s? What changed and what hasn't? Might be a difficult question, but still, let's try and realize what coding looked like these days and versus that days, and how the shift from monolithic architecture to microservices mirrors Web 2 to Web 3 evolution evolved. What do you have to say?
Hello everyone. Thanks, Ivan, for the intro. Excited to talk to you guys about, I guess, how old I am and where the journey to coming to this point and all the crazy stuff, I guess, we've seen and how much things have changed. I mean, my career started. You hate to say it, but over 20 years ago. Well, I guess I haven't already let that out of the bag, but. Um, yeah, it started over 20 years ago, and things were very different, obviously. When I got to college, the internet was around. It was a thing that you could send emails and you could do little online chats with your friends or whatever. But that was, before even AOL. And maybe AOL Messenger was around right around then. But I mean, it was a very different world, right? You had your computer and everything lived on your computer. Everything worked on your computer. All your development, anything that you did was on your computer or on your Linux workstation or Unix workstation back then. In college, we actually had a lot of Solaris Spark stations is what we used to use, but everything was on there, right? You didn't really have anything in the cloud. There was no cloud to speak of at the time. Um, and I remember, you would spin up your web server, you would do all your J2EE or XML RPC, all that stuff would just be on your machine. You would have the server there, the client there, everything. And so it was interesting because you had to set this huge heavy stack to be able to do anything, right? To deploy your code, you already had to do this huge heavy stack. And then the other thing was that you couldn't scale anything at that time. If you had to, if you needed more power for your web server or your web app or your web app plus your database, again, all pretty much locally hosted, you would have to just get a new machine. You couldn't just spin up something in the cloud and magically have a bigger database, or even start from that point, right, where you wouldn't even need a database on your local machine to do your own development. And yeah, so that was a very different time in terms of coding. Um, Development environments, depending on the language you're using. If you're doing Java, there's actually some pretty good development stuff available for you to use. If you're doing C++ in the Microsoft world, obviously Visual Studio Code was and still is a great product, and now it has become the kind of de facto environment for everyone. But that's changed because now it's probably, I would argue, probably used less for C++ on Windows development, and everything else is what's more primarily used there. Um, so yeah, it was uh, everything was very local. Everything was very kind of just whatever you had in front of you was what you could use, and there was no. If you didn't have the documentation on your downloaded, you have to go download it or find it versus just a click away. Everything is now. Um, Another thing I wanted to mention was how different it was for releases. People, big corporations, they would still cut CDs to some degree, right? Some of you may not know what CDs are. The acronym or the abbreviation stands for compact disc. But yeah, we would literally print these physical things that we would send out in the mail to people, and then they would install software. Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit. By the early 2000s, that wasn't so much the case. You could download software and upgrade things online. But it wasn't just a few days before that. You were actually printing physical things and mailing them in the mail to other companies to upgrade their software. Um, I feel like around this time is where things started to shift a little bit. Obviously, AWS became a thing in the kind of mid, 2000 to 2010, late, in the early 20 teens. Obviously, it was already a known thing to a lot of people. And all of a sudden, these online services just became so prevalent. You could do so much online that you used to have to set up yourself. Whether that was source control. I've spent countless hours messing with my own CVS and my own SVN. Again, maybe source control systems that many of you aren't familiar with, but this is what preceded Git. And then obviously now everyone just has free source control. You can just put everything into GitHub, and it's just there, and it has a bunch of tools that are available free for most developers, and not a very large cost to even small startups like us that we can just use for a few bucks. And we have all the stuff that you would have an entire engineer that their whole job was to just do that. Yeah, it's been pretty amazing, the kind of migration to where we are now. But I feel like that doesn't all come for free, per se. There's still the same problems that kind of existed in the world of computer science and enterprise software. Whatever the field of software you were doing, they still exist. They're not going away, right? And so. To that end, there is maybe more complexity before each engineer kind of would know the end to end of how everything worked. If you had a web app, you would know a decent idea of how the UI would work on the browser. Of course, back then there was not even JavaScript in the browser. Is very limited. Now you can do full apps, but given that it was simpler, you kind of knew what was going on in the browser. You knew what was going on in the mid-tier and the web server. You knew what was going on in the backend and the database and on your application server, or as I used to use J2EE when I was working at Oracle. So yeah, these things are you would kind of know all of it, and then now things have become more complex, which makes it easier to spin up things, but it also makes it easier to not understand what you're spinning up. And I think that is and that's getting easier. Right. In the first days of being able to spin up a cloud service, super easy. You just spin it up, and you kind of knew. Sorry, I take that back. You'd spin it up, but you wouldn't really know how it was configured and whatnot. And now there's a lot of people that help you, with more well-defined, let's say, Docker instance that you can spin up that does what you need, and you have a pretty good idea of what it is, and you may not need to worry about too much. But and so to that end, I think the Web2 world has become very easy to work in, right? There's kind of predefined, well set recipes on how you do a lot of this stuff, whether it's in Python or Ruby or whatever language that your enterprise, your software is written in. That's pretty okay. But okay, so now we get to what we're trying to do now is we're trying to, I think all of us collectively are trying to are realizing, okay, Web2 was hugely successful. How do we bring this to the Web3 world? And there's obvious areas of improvement. Decentralization is amazing. It brings transparency and trust to a system versus like having a gatekeeper. Whether that's your Amazon or Facebook, whatever it is. But of course, that comes at a cost of performance. That comes at a cost of UI. That comes at a cost of the complexity as well, right? I'm not saying Facebook and Apple and Amazon; those guys aren't very complex behind the scenes, but they have a centralized approach to it, so it's kind of easier to manage. Versus what we're trying to do here is, we're trying to do it in a decentralized way, and so I think. We should take as many of the lessons that we've ironed out in the Web2 world and try to bring that over to Web3. And let's be honest, I spent most of my career at a high frequency trading firm, which is not. I guess you can say it's Web2 in the sense that we were tackling some of the same scaling problems and speed and performance problems that I guess when you say Web2, you think, web app, Amazon, Facebook, whatever, but we were tackling a lot of the same problems on the back end in, a different angle. Ours was to facilitate trading on electronic markets, and theirs were to serve billions of users, web UIs, right? But I mean, to that end, those same problems that we were tackling and solving. The goal is now let's bring all those lessons over to Web3. Let's try to do the simple things that we learned. I'm not going to say simple. They're complex things. But there are things that we learned from in a distributed cloud environment that we can apply now to Web3. And I think that's what we're trying to do here is bring some of that knowledge up from the Web2 area and no longer just think, oh, yeah, I feel like for a while we were always just like Web3, Web2 is old, it's outdated or whatnot. But then we realized that, hey, where are the users sticking to? They're still on Web2, they're very happy with it, and it's fast. So, why don't we take some of those lessons and try to apply it here? I think that's what we're here for.
I think, yeah, that's one of the reasons why you personally decided to join this space. Thank you. I mean, that's such a great and really deep dive snapshot of early days. I see behind your smile maybe like a little bit of nostalgia, but I hope that you can express and feel the same similar moments here in Web3 while we are building the early days. Moving forward,
to me is nostalgia is distributed systems. So again, as I said, I could be in the 1990s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and now the 2020s. As long as I'm in distributed systems, I have that same feeling of nostalgia because it's a lot of similar problems and getting to solve it at an even bigger scale and more complex, but satisfying solution, I guess.
Yeah. That brings us to something you often say, that Web3 isn't about reinventing the wheel. But I'm curious, like, according to your opinion, why blockchain isn't reinventing the wheel, but instead like optimizing for a trustless global system?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the concept of the blockchain, I mean, no longer novel. I mean, it's been around for, over a decade now. And I don't know the exact history of the first day of someone thought about the blockchain, but you know what I mean? Bitcoin has been around for a while, well over 10 years. It is a novel idea that has gained traction, and I think people understand it now and are looking for looking for something there that everyone can use easily. And so, it's a novel idea, but at the same time, like I feel like a lot of jumps in the world of computer science and software tech that we use, it's really more of a, you get that novel idea, but then you just apply the old principles to make that novel idea happen. And I think we can't let go of that kind of. Obviously, there's been new research that's been done. There's been, new novel papers that have come out. Obviously, computer science research and academia and whatever's coming out of the private industry, all the stuff is not at a standstill. They're making improvements. But I feel like at every step of the way, a lot of it is, it's really rooted in just very simple first principles that have been around for 50 years or 40 years. And so, I feel like there just needs to be maybe not everyone sees it that way, but I see it in the way. It could be that I'm an older gentleman, but I just see that in the 2 decades or so that I've been working in this field, how much like really truly new groundbreaking things has there been. Of course there's been a few, but again, most of it's just incrementally improving on things that have been around for a long time. And I feel that acknowledging that and recognizing that is a weapon. It's a tool. It's something to help us. It's not a bad thing to be looking backwards and making sure we take the right lessons, right, instead of jumping forward and not looking back. And as we've seen, there's been more than our share of mistakes in crypto. So I think that's all I'm saying is, let's take the good parts and run with that, and not just think that we're going to reinvent everything from scratch.
Yeah, on this positive note, I think we'll come closer to the conclusion. And thank you very much for addressing these points. And I hope that this gives a bit more excitement and interest towards what Altius is building and why we are doing this. And hopefully in the next sessions, we'll be able to explain more on where we are and what's next. So thank you everyone for tuning into these episodes. We hope you learned something new about how software architecture has evolved and why that matters in the world of Web3 today. If you got questions for Anit or any other team members in our stellar engineering team, and you want to hear more about specific topic, drop a comment below. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. See you.